Good day, my fellow Americans and good people of the world. Today I would like to address you in regards to a concept that I would like to offer in an approach to advancing the ideals of establishing a more direct democracy for America so that the people can take back the power that is constitutionally designated for them, and to take back the powers that have been taken away from the people and installed into the illegitimate authorities of concentrated power within corrupted branches of the existing three-branch system of government in America under the direct authority of a president, their administration, and their political party in the movement of the Make America a Great Project 2025 agenda, which has the concerted design to undermine the legitimacies of American democracy, to destabilize American domestic order, and to assert a absolute tyranny over these United States of America. And so what I'm offering is something that has never been tried before. And mostly because I don't think anybody has really ever thought of it before, and nobody has ever really considered the potentials that exist in which this could actually become a thing. It's an innovative approach to governance, to expand what we consider democracy and to formalize a more direct version of democracy that empowers the individual, and to really emphasizes the founding principle of the United States of America, which is independence, and to by right establish an additional insular protection for the American people and good people of the world, to protect them from the government getting too big for its britches, in the concept that power tends to corrupt, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so we must make sure that there is a adequate disbursement and separation of powers and a equalizing co-creative branch of the government that allows the people themselves to determine their will and their want and how they believe we should proceed forward in terms of best practices given any situation within a scenario universe. And by empowering the people to stand as a corrective mechanism when things go wrong, and to stand as an anti-corruption mechanism when government and those in government are corrupting the Constitution, the American people themselves can more directly govern under the founding principles of we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, to establish justice, to ensure domestic tranquility, to provide for the common defense, to promote the general welfare, and to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. We ordained and established our Constitution. We are a nation of the people. We are a nation by the people. We are a nation for the people. Of, by, for. We, the people. And to truly embody that in a more direct democracy is the most relevant, befit the times, obvious, common sense approach to restoring the integrities of our nation, given the fact that we are now living in times in which there is a concerted effort to establish absolute despotism. And so, what I am offering in suggestion for your consideration to take within the present situation in which we find ourselves, within the context of this situation, and within the context of our historical renderings of understanding, considering all that has come to pass and the aftermath that we're dealing with in terms of the choices and decisions of representative decision makers that have led us to where we are now, in a point in time where it is being suggested by the sitting president of the United States and his active participating minions in his regime. All the members of his administration are suggesting that the government has the absolute authority to designate the power to kill anybody on a whim for any reason to which they could arbitrarily justify in the aftermath, to the point that it means that you no longer are safe, and there is no sound logics pointing to reasonable alignment and attunement with the Constitution of the United States of America. It has been usurped and has been replaced with the absolute dictatorial determinations of one single person, the President of the United States, who has proven himself consistently time and time and yes, time again, to not care about you. He does not care about you. He does not do things that care for you. He does things to you in such a way that strips you of your rights, strips you of your dignities, strips you of your humanity. And so obviously it's a call to the American people to rightly say, things have gotten out of hand. And now we must take it into our hands, the leverages to which we have already established within the Constitution that says we, the people, have the right to govern ourselves, and to reaffirm in the form of a new constitutional amendment that says that we, the people, are the ultimate arbitrators of our fate, our future, our destiny, and how we so choose to be governed. And if those who are in government do not govern on our behalf in a way befitting the needs of the people, then they should be able to be removed by the people. A constitutional amendment establishing a fourth branch of government called civics, and establishing within that also the personal dominion of every individual as a sovereign, autonomous, independent individual, responsible, accountable, and taking ownership for their place within the co-creative co-governance of America. Within that, we give ourselves the power back. We take it back, we designate it for ourselves, and we confirm it within and embed it within our Constitution so that it cannot be undermined by the whims and the wills of radical, mindless radicals and their tyrannical plans to undermine our democracy. So what I'm offering is a suggestion for your consideration to take into account all that I am offering, all that I have been offering, and all that I will continue to offer that is in ultimate service to what is good, what is just, what is fair, what is reasonable, what is right. Wanting only good outcomes for you and for everyone, concerning myself with wanting to continue to perfect the formation of a more perfect union here in the United States of America, and to make sure that we are free and independent people, that we continue to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness without the government coming in and telling you what to do, what to think, what to feel, to taking away your freedoms, your rights, your liberties, your pursuit of happiness, without the government facing any consequence of that. That is not the American way. That is not what America stands for. That is exactly what America will not stand for. And so what I'm offering as a prospect candidate for President of the United States of America is that I will pursue with you, alongside with you. I will help you to formalize and establish the correct wording in terms of the practices, the protocols, the principles of a fourth branch of government and the establishment of personal dominion in the form of a new constitutional amendment that reimagines and evolves the ERA from what it is to help to expand, to make sure that our rights as independent voters of co-determining our fate as a nation, as a people, that we will work together to establish the necessary wording to legislatively establish this new constitutional amendment. And understanding that the likelihood of that occurring in totality before the next election is possible? Absolutely. Is it hard work? Definitely. But no matter whether it can pass before the next election, what I am offering is that I, as a candidate, will do everything to work with you to help to make that be established before the next election. And if not, upon being elected President of the United States of America, I will effectively operate under the understanding that that amendment is real. And I will continue to work with you to establish that constitutional amendment. But in the meantime, I will operate as if it is so. And I will work with you for us to continuously perfect the model representation of how that actually truly works out in the day-to-day lives of Americans and the day-to-day administration of the federal government in working with the state governments, establishing a more individuated level of government, going from the individual to the local, to the state, to the federal, always turning to the smallest concentration of power of the individual to determine whether or not what we are doing is actually serving the best interest of the people. And then as we come to points of contention or points of which we're not exactly sure how to proceed forward, then we always refer to the next concentrated level of power. And in that role modeling of how that effectively will work, we will establish for ourselves the means, the modes, the methods, and the determined ends of the outcomes that we are actually working towards creating for ourselves, in which we will have scenarios that are based not off of things just happening and you not having control over it, but you actually having tangible seat at the table, leverage to which you can shift the tides and make a difference in a way that is far beyond the powers of just going out and protesting, in which you can voice your concerns and give us your opinions and give us your insights so that we know what we can do to make a difference in all the ways that it matters. And then to suggest that we will continue to work towards perfecting that model, working together, and that I will always turn to the lowest concentrated power in order to understand really how does this play out in the day-to-day lives of every American. And we'll work to perfect that union together and establish a more direct democracy together. And in my terms of service will not only represent the establishment of a cohesive, consistent, coherent model of a direct democracy, I'll also be working towards advancing those projects and those policies and those proposals that will help to ensure that we shore up the weaknesses of every individual in America to empower them to become more self-sufficient, self-sustaining, free and independent people. So they can be more self-governed, so they have to look to the government less. And where they can address their own grievances. They can look out for each other. We can all understand what's right, what's wrong, and always rise to the occasion to do the right thing at the right time for the right reasons and in the right way. To really embed within the consciousness of every single American a conscious consideration. Have a conscience to know what is right and what is wrong, and to always turn to do the right thing. And when things go wrong, we don't go wrong with them. We immediately begin to do the good work to help to make amends, to set things right, and to strike a moral tone, to do exactly what we're supposed to do in every moment of contention, which is to establish justice. What is justice in this moment? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What sort of outcomes does it produce? What sort of atmosphere of social and cultural and civic and political concern does it create? How does it make you feel? Does it make you feel more safe? Because that's what it's supposed to do. And we establish that together. We work together. And I will continue to work by synthesizing the voice of the people as they bring it into the fold through the technological innovations within government that are meant to bring all of the voices of the people into the considerations of government, to make sure that that direct democracy actually works the way that is properly intended to. And that it will be a very transparent process so that people can see the inner workings and understand the reasoning why we reached the conclusions that we did. And to give them a platform by which they can redress their grievances to say that whether they agree or they disagree with it. Because ultimately the government is not about everybody following in pursuit of the interests and the ideals and the ambitions of one single person that has it in their mind that they're going to make America great, whatever that word means to them, which obviously molds and shapes and, the delineation and definition of it is so sketchy and so unreasonable that no one person could point to it and say that that's what America stands for, because it changes day to day in this administration, doesn't it? POTUS 47 has, to the point, made it that we question the legitimacy of our institutions and our government and the safety of the American people because of the law being interpreted in such a way that covers their asses when they make mistakes. Instead of taking extreme ownership and responsibility and appointing reasonable means by which you can have determinations to ensure that accountability happens and that we can make sure the victims and the perpetrators are made whole and that we are creating a more perfect union in the fallout and the aftermath of any event occurrence. Instead of doing the right thing, they are forcing the situation to go more wrong and then creating this moral conflict within all people, including those that do actually follow the president. They are now having to lower their standards of moral legitimacies, lower their standards of what is just, fair, reasonable, right, lower their standards of saying, like, well, that's acceptable, in order to conform to the new lower standards that the president is setting. Instead of excelling and exceeding and to becoming better, the government, under the direction of POTUS 47, is becoming a worse version of itself. The way the government is operating is bringing out the worst in everybody. And there are consequences to which the repercussions are irreversible in trend and effect. And instead of diverging from further continuation of negative outcome consequences on a continuum of spectacle and rage and dissolution of our union, the POTUS 47 regime is forcing us to continue on that continuum because they don't want to accept responsibility for the fact that they made a mistake. We need to diverge from that. We need to start establishing for ourselves a new way forward, to establish what best practices are and what that future is going to look like. And as I say, in this ethos, it is absolutely about establishing a situational context, a historical context, a fine context, an atmosphere and an environment in which we can all feel safe and understand that we are protected, and to understand that we have rights and we have responsibilities and duties as well, and that we can all show up and do our part to make sure that when things go wrong, we don't go wrong with them, that we make the appropriate corrective mechanism to get back in alignment and attunement with an ever more healthy, sustainable, just, resilient, peaceful, stable, sensible, common sensible way forward for America. By becoming President of the United States and pursuing the candidacy of President of the United States, my commitment to fostering the opportunities that will allow for the establishment of this fourth branch of government through a constitutional amendment is really about understanding how much I deeply care about the American people, regardless of parties or ideologies, regardless of who you are now or what you have become, regardless of your decision making, regardless of what faction group you want to separate yourself into, regardless of what truths you are trying to live by, and whether or not that actually aligns with the, apparent lived reality of everyone. My point is to find a way to keep us united to a common cause for the continuation of our nation, to ensure that we have an experience lived here by those in America that we sense and we feel is the best thing to secure our health, our well-being, our happiness, our prosperity, our sense of knowing that we're doing good and we're being good, and to make sure that there's nothing that is keeping us from being able to proceed forward in the ways that we know how, in the ways that we must. When things go astray, that we correct ourselves, we right ourselves, we set things right. And to give everybody a sensibilities of having the rights and the responsibilities and the duties to work towards that ever more perfect union together. It is extremely important to me to make sure that the people are empowered to be able to stand up for what is right in the moment, and to also have a sensibility of the personal checks and balances, of standards, of high standards, of good character and good moral legitimacies, so that you can be the person in that moment that shines the example of this is the way to be, this is the way to act and behave in this situation. When something happens and you get hurt, of course, righteous anger is going to flare up in those who have a very strong sensibility of what is justice. And you're going to want that system to be corrected. And I honestly believe that if you have a legitimate leverage within the government to be able to start working on the process of correcting things when they go wrong, that you can invest all your time, your energy, your effort, your emotions, your enthusiasms, your need to do something and act. You can act pro-responsively towards outcomes that will get us to where we would actually want to go, which is to a resolution that stops chaos in its tracks and leads us towards a more perfect union and domestic order and peace. And I believe by giving the people the power to help to make decisions within government will help them to focus and concentrate their efforts towards that in times of chaos or controversy or destabilizations or other events that shake our foundations and have us asking and questioning, what does America stand for? We can be the embodiment of that. Just like you go out now and you protest and you hold up your signs and you say, this is what America stands for, this is what America will not stand for. And to demand accountability and to demand that there be corrective mechanisms set into place. And we demand people to take ownership. In this way, you would actually have the means to make those things have legitimate outcomes. You can enact a chain of events in which those things are set on trajectory to be accomplished. Accountability, responsibility, corrective measures, and the means to be able to make all people whole again, so that we can reconfirm to ourselves and each other our unity, the things that are holding us together. And in becoming president and always looking to the people for the answers, knowing that I'm but one person and there's no way I could possibly know all the answers. But I do know who I am as a person, and I know I am really, really good at taking what the people express and taking their voices and finding a way to synthesize from that the essence of what really, truly matters in the moment. And then to formalize the right means to express a corrective mechanism considering all those variables. That is the one element that will help us to move forward and beyond that in the right direction, and the direction that will move along a continuum of an imperishable world peace. And to keep America moving forward towards forming that more perfect union. And allowing each and every American to become an inspiration to others of how to role model good humanity. And just what should be the, basic thing that we anticipate in one another is just to do the right thing, Even when you make a mistake, it's really hard to accept responsibility for it, but man, you got to do it. And you got to immediately start going to work to make amends. And this gives everybody a sensibility in their head that says, I really am accountable to this. The fate of the future really does rest on me. Because, even the flutter of a butterfly makes a tremendous, profound difference in the world. And you have to consider yourself as being, you may be small, and your voice alone may be small, but you put it together, we're a mighty roar. And when we're all syncing up our voices that says, this is what's right, this is the right thing to do at the right time, the right way, for the right reasons, and that resonates with us and says, you know what, that's right. I remember who I am. I'm a person living in a free and independent nation, where we value and we cherish life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That we want everybody to live in the sensibilities of safety and security. We all want to know that we can trust in our systems to be corrective and anti-corruptive. And that we all know that we're building up the resiliency and the fortification, and we're instilling within ourselves a sense of fortitude that no matter what happens, we will find a way, or we will make a way to set things right. And this gives us the means to consciously be aware that we have that power. And as president, deferring to the will of the people through a means that can capture the voice of the people in such a way where it really truly distills the essence of the care and the concern that they're asking for and they want and that they need, so we can respond proactively in the right way to make sure that we don't make matters worse. We immediately begin corrective mechanisms to make amends, and then to do that in the most transparent way possible so we can all see what's happening, so we all know why we do the things that we do, and how we're taking responsibility, how we're taking ownership, and what we're going to do to set things right. Because that permeates the conscious of everybody, and it helps us become more consciously considerate. It helps us to better establish ourselves with a sense of morality, in concerted efforts when, things happen in any situation, that we will have a voice of reason in that moment that says, this is the right thing to do. Refrain from destruction, And then to be able to utilize the voice of the people to help to establish new policies when something happens and people raise their voice and, dissatisfaction or, disgust, or dissent. It's okay, so why did this happen? What could have been done to make things different? What could have done that would have prevented this? What necessary things were not in place that should have been? Were we ever aware of this, or are we just now realizing this was a weakness that we now need to shore up? Take that into consideration. We're not pointing fingers, and we're not blaming people, and we're not trying to, advert taking responsibility. It's really just identifying, the chain of error that occurred, and what points to which there could have been a decision maker that was empowered in a moment to be able to create different outcomes. And what do we need to do to make sure that there's, decision makers in those roles are not beset by innate biases that would have them lead to making the wrong decision based off of personal interests or ideological interests rather than the collective best interest. And then how do we inform and teach people what is the collective best interest? We create experiences and opportunities and accountabilities and transparency so we can all see that. Air the dirty laundry. Don't be afraid of it, but also don't use it as an opportunity to try to destroy the spirit of another person and make them feel like they're irredeemable. We have to create a corrective mechanism. Also brings about the opportunity for redemption. Corrective mechanisms, our justice has to be about making sure that people are made whole. I have been working up as best I can with the resources that I have and the capacities that I have within the limiting circumstances that I'm currently in to do my best to make way for the potentials of a future in which we can innovate out many of the problems that we're seeing and we're facing, we're experiencing right now, even some of the things that are just emotionally charged and driven. That isn't just about, systemic failures, and isn't just about, government failures, but also the failures of our sensibilities as people, that we know when things go wrong, how to not go wrong with them. And in these policy formations, it's always considering the human at the core of every single policy. and trying to find a way of understanding the human tendencies and the human nature and the human capacity to do both good and to do bad. And not trying to create a scenario where it limits people's choices and options and free will. For Christ's sakes, God gave us free will. The government shouldn't be able to impose laws against you to try to take it away from you. But we do have to willingly submit ourselves and abide by laws that we decide together are the things reasonable, just, fair, right, and good, that helps to make sure that, we can live together in relative peace. To consistently reconfirm order in our domestic and international and global relationships with one another. And to really live that out loud and be the living answer to, how do we create the collective cultural shifts of humanity to keep us aligned and in tune with an ever more healthy, sustainable, resilient, stable, just, and peaceful world. What is it going to take right now? Who do we need to empower, and who do we need to take power away from? Who must have the authority to do things, and who should not have the authority to do things? What is the appropriate measures of force, and what are the necessary components of incentive? What are the ways that we can to keep it in our collective conscious of like, wow, this is really the situation we're still in, guys. We're still trying to deal with this particular problem, and then bring out a call of service to people and say, like, everybody bring your best ideas. We need to find a way to innovate this out, and then align, a continuum of prestige for which those people help us to solve those things and innovate those problems out. And to get us to collectively work together, in a cohesive way towards a proper intended use for our government. Achieving the preamble promise, making sure we're upholding to, the basic premise by which we were founded on. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, freedom, independence, liberty. And involving ourselves in a collective co-creation of what our civilization is going to be, what our society is going to represent, and how we're going to feel within our communities, and what our sensibilities are going to be about one another, how we can be of service, and what we must do in order to just give everybody just enough room and space, man, to be themselves, and to do so in such a way where we're not imposing or interfering or interceding in ways to which it strips somebody else of their dignity or their life or their right to self-determine, man. And I think having a conscious president that is mindful of the will of the people and actually, calls on the voice of the people to help to figure out best practices moving forward, and to take it into consideration that, all voices have relevant information. Sometimes it's helping us to establish best practices in the way we move forward, and sometimes it's helping us to establish what are the, barriers to creating consensus in terms of what are the emotional, and ideological and misinformed or ignorant aspects of things to which we have not yet resolved a conscious mutual agreement of understanding. And how might we better inform one another through experiences and dialogues and debates, all done in a public and very transparent way, and done so not in the infighting and who's right and who's wrong and these sorts of things in such a way of trying to force people to move in a certain ideological direction, but rather understanding, like, when we distill all of this down, what does it fundamentally say about what we're trying to accomplish here? You know, are we trying to set standards and to improve best practices? You know, are we trying to get at ways to make sure that, you know, people feel more free and liberated, but also safe and sound? Like, are we taking the active, you know, stance that we are really trying to do the right thing here, guys? And we really need you to be willing to be a part of that process too. And not in a way where it's forcing, and not in a way where it's, you know, like trying to beat you down and make you into the villain, but really just like, everybody makes mistakes and we have to have corrective mechanisms so that, you know, we don't have to live in, you know, this false paradigm that, you know, asserts that, you know, when you did something wrong, no, I didn't actually do anything wrong, you know, and instead forcing everybody to live out in, you know, a false reality that, you know, isn't truth. The truth will always eventually reveal itself, and things not of integrity will eventually fall apart. And so if we're making decisions based off of lies or deceptions or misrepresentations or misinterpretations, then we are setting ourselves up effectively for failure. Now, that failure may not be immediate. It may not be, you know, in the few days to come. It may be something that we don't actually, like, experience the repercussions of for very far down the line, but you don't remember the cause for that effect because you put it out of your mind as a reality that you didn't want to face, a truth that you did not want to hear and accept. And we can't live in a paradigm like that. We literally have POTUS 47 right now in his administration dictating to the American people what to do, what to think, and what to feel in regards to a situation where an American citizen was killed in the streets of America by somebody designated by the administration as being a law enforcement. And instead of allowing for time for, you know, the law to work itself out and to do what it's supposed to do in terms of, you know, understanding what laws apply, understanding what was the situation, you know, what's the historical context, and these sorts of, finding out all the variables as to what led to that point in which this thing that never should have happened did happen, and now we have to live in the aftermath and sort things out. Instead of taking the time to figure out the truth of what happened and really understand it, so we make sure that proceeding forward we're doing the right thing, you know, and we're living in reality and base truth that says, wow, this really was what happened and how we got here. Instead of doing that, they immediately came up with a narrative to cover their own asses, protect their personal interests over the best interest of the American population, and now have set a precedence to suggest that under the determinations of the government's interpretation of a situation, without any facts of variables actually being taken into consideration, just rather what was the expedient fix that would most suit their needs to justify their actions and prevent them from facing any consequences or accountabilities, that they will determine what happened. They will prevent investigations from happening. And yes, the government will justify the killing of Americans on the streets of America. And now just let that sink in for a second and realize the atmosphere of fear that creates. The paradigm of uncertainty that establishes. The reality that law is effectively lawless. And so long as you have been directed by the President of the United States to carry out orders that they have given you a sense that do whatever it takes to carry out those orders, and then left to the individual devices of the person in a moment of discernment, their sensibilities of what is right or wrong in that situation, and then the historical context of like what may have led that person to be maybe more on edge in terms of how they would interpret a situation based off of past and prior decision making or experiences that maybe made them feel like they would have to be more fearful for their life because of something else that had happened to them before that might be similar, and that would trigger a sense in them that they have to be more reactive and quick to react in a situation in order to protect themselves. You know, understanding that situational context for a person who is in the decision-making position in which they have been authorized by the President of the United States to use whatever force they deem necessary, and that person has been given orders to be able to, you know, enact a very loosely defined order of conducting certain types of activity in certain places, you know, in order to achieve some arbitrary quota of, you know, getting all of these people out of America under the use of force, you know, under the guise of patriotism, you know, and identifying those individuals based off of racist profilings, you know, and then seeking these people in situations where they're not well trained but over equipped, and also empowered and ennobled with the sense that the government will shield you and protect you from any accountabilities or responsibilities. So don't worry about refraining from using excessive forms of force. All of that context and situations, I mean, you literally are creating, the President of the United States, POTUS 47, is creating a situation in which it is only inevitable that American citizens will be murdered on the streets, and there will be no accountability for it. And now think of what that ferments and festers in the hearts and minds of people who have really extreme sensitivities to righteousness. The righteous anger is flaming up right now. And the good people of the world are having to temper themselves with extreme acts and measures of self-control and poise, far beyond the capacities of those who are being trigger happy on the streets and shooting people at will and whim in an instant without any reasonable justification. The good people of America are having to refrain and peacefully protest, but still just feeling so desperate of like, you know, what is this even doing if the government is not accountable to the people? They don't listen, you know, and they're so busy, you know, distorting reality, misrepresenting facts, you know, and telling people don't believe your eyes because that's not the way I see it. And so there's such a sense of injustice happening right now in the world. And the faith that people have in our institutions and our government is waning. And the resolve of people to say, like, I need to uphold social and civic ideals because, you know, we are a peaceful society. Those things are now on very, you know, rocky ground, because the foundations that the government is underpinning under the situations that we are living out in our day-to-day lives is underpinned by their lies, their deception, their cruelty, their indifference to death, their want for people to suffer and to be inflicted with pain, especially if you're going against what the government says that they're going to do, whether you like it or not. Like, this is a very unfair situation. And there's no justice in any of this. They're denying Americans justice. And so people are going to want to act. And so, POTUS 47 is creating this wholly contentious situation that is unnecessary. And the American people, by right, ought to be angry and frustrated. But how do you express that in such a way that is constructive instead of destructive? Because I'm telling you right now, it's obvious in the essence of everything you distill down to what POTUS 47 and his administration is doing is they want the destruction. They take pride in it. They love to make that destruction spectacle and then feed it into the minds of Americans, say, this is what you should think and feel. Doesn't it make you so angry that I can do all this harm to you and you can't do anything about it? There's no accountability here. I'm the boss and I'm the one that gets to say. What are you going to do? Nothing. Ha ha. I've owned the libs. Whatever. Such a sense of injustice in that. And so they're leading people to eventually give up on trusting the government. Why should I honor a pledge to people that don't honor their pledge? And so they're creating the destabilization and leading to dissolution of our union and leading us to a failed state. Because on top of all this, guys, law is lawless. You have mindless radicals leading the way, deceiving the people, shooting people on the streets, kidnapping people, harming children, separating families, and under all the context of this violence that they're doing against personhood, violating the personal dominion of human beings. Under the guise of all of that, or under the realities of all of that, on top of that, we have an economic decline and a massive shift of wealth in a entrenching of inequalities that is based off of nothingness, like the people who have, stocks and capital investments. These people are getting more and more and more rich and more powerful, and their voices are drowning out the voices of the rest of the people, and they're all denying the reality of those who are saying, like, we're suffering, we're barely keeping afloat, we're dying here, man, help us to, this isn't fair. All those people are ignoring the voices of everyone else who's suffering, who are barely surviving. And POTUS 47's like, yeah, man, this is the rich, this is the great, this is the new golden age, man, America's awesome. Look at us doing all this good. We're the richest and we get all these people to invest and all these other things. But then when you look at the lived experiences of most Americans, they're struggling. People who are labor wage workers are seeing their spending capacity of every single dollar that they earn is being shrunk. And the capacity that while you have to work more, you make less. And the less that you have that dollar gets stretched less and less in terms of your capacity to cover your expenses of cost of living per month. Mind you, it's not just because of the fact that the dollar's value is shrinking, because it's not actually backed up by any tangibilities. It's backed up by vaporware, these arbitrary schemes of shareholder values, that are all just based off of, ones and zeros, relationships to a decimal point in some computer system that, in any moment the bubbles will burst and then, they're going to have to be bailed out or whatever by what? The taxpayer dollars of the hardworking Americans that are doing the labor wage of the practical work that is the only tangibility that actually represents the value of our dollar to keep it valuable, And because more and more of those jobs are being taken away because corporations are shifting what they produce to be something that they can run around a scheme of relying on AI, because then they don't have to pay a person to do the work. And so in the meantime, the practical work that needs to get done of the tangibilities built up in society to make sure we have the necessary life vital resources, all that work is not getting accomplished. Those companies are shutting down. Whole entire populations of people are being left by the side of the road without any, adequate and decent work to be able to do to make a way, make a living, make a life. All those things are shutting down, and people are focusing on AI, which is just vaporware. What does it do? What is that going to be able to do to improve your life? And then they're worried about shifting in movement of money. They're making money off of the movement of money. That doesn't do anything to improve the quality of life of everyday Americans. These arbitrary schemes of gaining wealth off of doing nothing, leaves us without the resources we need to live quality standard lives. Makes it so that people don't have good and decent work so they can, self-determine, be self-sufficient, self-reliant. In the meantime, the government's cutting off any resources of, welfare, capacities, and rigging it in a system where people are going to be forced to take jobs that no reasonable, conscious person would take, working at the rate that they're trying to force you into. But they're leaving you with no other options, and they're not creating viable economic opportunities for companies to be founded in America that work off of building tangibilities, things that we need, like houses, And so in the context of all that, and then we're being, set up for failure in that economic sense, and people are struggling to survive. Because of that, they are disempowered, and they're so worried about how to get along with their own survival, but they're not able to stand up and defend against the rights that are being stripped away from them by the government that is concentrating more and more power, So they're depleting you of the capacity to attain capital, agency, and resource and economic power. They're taking away your personal rights and your ability to stand up for your rights. And in the meantime, they're also saying, everything that we've accumulated together, our collective common resource, is no longer going to the mutual benefits of our mutual securities, our mutual interests, our mutual respects. It's not going to make sure that we're providing for the preamble promise. Instead, it is diverting towards these massive power plays on the global stage to try to steal away the resources of other nations because we claim that we need them for our own. In the meantime, we're going to pool all of our collective resource into the military so that we have the might, power, capacity to go and forcibly overthrow other governments, and then bend them to our will, and then make them give us their resources because America says so under POTUS 47's determinations that this is what we got to do in order to make America great. But in the determinations of, what does America really get out of that? It's not more national security. It's not a more peaceful world. It's not more global stability. It's setting us up for World War III, where other nations think it's perfectly fine to disregard international laws, rules, and norms, and then just start doing whatever they want, because who's going to hold them accountable, right? And then going off in this imperialistic rampage to go steal away from other people's resources, depleting the capacity for those people in those countries to be able to, get along with life and live the good life. In the meantime, it's not improving the chances that everyday Americans get to live the good life. It only goes, the buck stops, at the people who are the investors, the people who are the capitalists, the ones who already have agency, capital, and resource. And the government does not create even a capacity to flow any of that to, the whole concentration of the population of America. It's only going to go towards those people who already have the concentrated power and wealth, and further entrenching inequalities, and thus further disenfranchising everyday Americans, and make them less, have less power over their own say of their own lives, less self-determined, less self-reliant. And they're already establishing the formations, of a corporate communism. And then they're eventually going to, there's no other way to avoid it, come into a full communism of society where people are going to be living by handouts. And what you get is what you got. and be grateful for it, because that's all you're gonna get, and there are no opportunities for you to get any more than that, because we have already determined that everything belongs to us, and we only give you enough to keep you going so you can do the work necessary to keep our systems, running, that give us the advantages all in our favor, and forever skew out of your favor, put you at a disadvantage. That's the truth and reality of the situation. These are selfish, self-centered, deviant people who are deviating from a course to which the world works for everybody. They're deviating away from a course in which, nobody gets disadvantaged. They're deviating away from a course that, makes sure that nobody gets left behind or kept behind. They're deviating from a course that makes it so that you and those that you love and your children and your children's children will be able to live the good life. They're taking that away from you to secure for themselves the means by which they have all the money, the power, the control, and the influence. And then they're creating destabilizations in the world. And then when the war and conflict breaks out, because, by taking something by force, the only way to maintain it is through force. And they're going to have some warm body to fill a position to go fight for that cause of keeping those assets and resources that we took by force. And so who does that mean? It means everyday regular American citizens are going to be first compelled, through incentive, and then compelled through force to go and fight foreign wars and to shed the blood of innocent Americans, in other nations, and to die, on the lands of foreign nations in order to uphold this really, unfair system, an America that isn't even worth defending. That's the scenario that POTUS 47 is creating, and what his MAGA government is trying to justify, and what his predecessor is going to lead forward on in continuum. And none of that leads to good outcomes that are going to be, what anybody would actually choose for themselves that they would want. POTUS 47 in his campaigning deceived the American public, led them to believe that he cared about you as an individual when he clearly does not have the capacity to care about anybody but himself. He promised that he was going to make your life better. He promised he was going to bring the cost of living down. He promised he wasn't going to get us into wars. He was going to create more safety. He was going to make things peaceful. And instead, he has created nothing but contention and conflict and chaos and controversy. And now we're in a situation, guys, where, it's like the forces of the glorification of God versus the glorification of greed. You know what I'm saying? And I am no way a religious person. And I'm not talking about God like in a secular sense, some religious, an ideation of what God is. But I'm talking about what we say in our Pledge of Allegiance. A God indivisible. We are one nation under God indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The founding principles of our nation were founded under the idea that our nation is going to be so supremely worthy of defense, worthy of existence, worthy of divine providence, to the point that we will hold ourselves to a standard so high that there is nothing above the good that we do than the very determinations of the orderly universal outcomes. A God indivisible that says, from cause is effect, as above so below, and we formalized ourselves to say we were going to hold ourselves to that high standard that says that nothing is above our sovereignty than the sovereignty of, the universe itself and its determination of this is how things are going to play out based off of, the terms and conditions of past and prior decision making and everything else that came to pass before. Where we are now, where we find ourselves now, is based off of past and prior decision making. And we, as a nation, pledged to ourselves, our lives, our sacred fortune, and our sacred oaths and our fortunes, that we were going to hold ourselves to a high standard, that nothing can come between us and the righteous formation of an ever more perfect union. And you're finding POTUS 47 and his MAGA movement and his, political regime trying to set themselves above the nation, above the Constitution, to say it's first God, then it's me, and then it's we. And the we is whatever the trickle-down effects of the consequences of our decision-making that makes everything come to me, And in that determination, where do you fit in their scenario? When it comes down to whether or not the government is serving on behalf of you as an individual, can you say that the government's on your side? Do you trust that the government's going to do right by you? No, you can't say that right now. And if you do, you're either living in a false reality, you're playing ignorant, or you're denying yourself the truth because it's too fucking scary to realize the fact that, man, we have got ourselves in a pickle here. This is not the place that we want to be. This is not the situation that we want to live in. But there's nothing that can be done about it other than for us to accept this is where we are, and now we have to work diligently and intentionally to innovate out these problems that we're facing in such a way that we set ourselves up for success in the future that leads away from these sorts of things ever happening again, Rise ourselves to the standard where it's God, we, then me, to put others first, in the consideration of, is what I'm about to do going to, promote goodwill, foster friendships? Is it the truth? Is it just, fair, reasonable, right for all parties involved? Can I say that it is collectively in the collective best interest of everyone involved? Can I say that I know that this is a part of the collective lived experience that becomes, our tomorrow's reality, that it's working towards making sure America works for everyone without the disadvantage of anyone, so that nobody gets left behind or kept behind, and that everybody lives the good life? And you look at the policies of the current president, his entire administration, and the entire MAGA movement, it is based off of disadvantaging whole populations of people. The guiding premise of the thing that they are putting the most resources and effort into is the idea of immigration, of divisiveness, a sense of superiority of race and class, and determining that we need to isolate ourselves from certain types of people and certain types of populations in order to ideologically form ourselves into a unification where only certain people belong, where only certain people are benefited, where only certain people live, with the blessings of liberty, the blessings of rights, and that the accountabilities always fall away to the scapegoat, and there will be excuses, when they make mistakes, but harsh, immediate, instant, executable justice, under whatever terms they call justice, when you step out of line with what they determine is just, fair, reasonable, and right. Mind you, coming from people that have their sensibilities of jurisprudence, which is their determining, paradigm of calculus of discernment and discretion, it has determined what is just, fair, reasonable, and right. is that other people have to be set at a disadvantage, other people have to be harmed, other people have to never get justice, other people have to be oppressed, other people have to be discriminated against, other people have to be attacked, other people have to be threatened, other people have to be, have their resources stolen away or taken away or denied and rejected to them, all in order for them to get the outcomes that they want, that are selfishly oriented. What we need to do, America, to diverge from that deviant continuum spectacle of negative outcome consequences that lead to bad outcomes, such as the death of American citizens on the streets by the police enforcement that has been directed by the government, to instead lead forward into a continuum of an imperishable world peace, obligating ourselves to establish the ethos of an American identity that's bound, in mutualisms, for mutual interests, mutual benefits, mutual securities, mutual respects, with an ethos of saying that we live the embodiment of the preamble promise. That is what we're dedicated to. And we uphold the concepts of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And that we are a nation, we the people, of the people, by the people, for the people. Our government is about all of us working together to co-creatively self-govern and govern in mutualisms. And we determine for ourselves the identity by which we are going to operate by, that says that we're trying to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, all these things. We need to make sure that we are living by an ideal that we can all wrap our heads around, a proper intended use for why we do these things, a proper intended use for our economy, and a proper intended use for our policies in politics, and our proper intended use of our social ontology, the way that we choose to live our lives, how we act, how we behave, how we orient our characters and our behaviors. What we determine is that's good humanity. We need to identify that, and I believe the best way to do that is to say that we are a nation of well-faring stewards. We are working to collectively establish ourselves in alignment and attunement with an ever more healthy, sustainable, just, and peaceful world. We're creating stability, coherence. We're conforming ourselves with, self-governance and self-determination. To mutually oblige ourselves to conform to the ideals that represent those things which keep us united. And we work towards the well-faring stewardship of all people, of all communities, of our homes, of our neighborhoods, our communities, our states, the environments that we are embedded within and we're wholly dependent upon. Stewardship of our interrelationships with other nations, and our stewardship of the global paradigm to which we all operate in and make decisions from based off of our sensibilities of what is just, fair, reasonable, and right, given all parties involved. And then our purposeful, intended, responsibilities of stewarding a healthy, habitable, stable, resilient planet. And choosing for ourselves best practices through our economy and our policy and our lifestyles to accomplish and actualize those things which will bring out the best outcomes for everyone, And well-faring stewardship helps us to work out on the continuum the right types of projects and proposals and policies that help to keep us working towards, engineering outcomes that are, part of that stewardship directive, and knowing we're upholding the preamble promise, we're, adhering to, the sensibilities of the four-way test by the Rotarians, which I think is a really good principled test of integrities, and then, adhering to the 5 agreements, understanding, don't make assumptions, don't take things personally, always speak the truth, live in the best truth and to hold ourselves up to that higher standard. And doing all this is about establishing a criterion echelon of society in which all people are able to be equal, right? we, within the criterion echelon, are all living the good life because we're each taking on the responsibilities and, asserting our rights and taking our powers and doing the dutiful, necessary good work to make sure that America works for everyone without the disadvantage of anyone, so nobody gets left behind or kept behind and everybody gets to live the good life. And in order to do that, we all have to be on the same page about it. And we all have to be able to voice where we are in terms of well, I'm not living the good life yet, but I'm going to tell you these are the things that I need in order to accomplish that, and then you compare that and contrast that with what other people are experiencing, and then we find the common grounds hey, if we do this one thing in this one area in this one way at the right time, and give enough of the, scaffolding for lives for people to level up their lives, man, we can do one thing and accomplish a leveling up of whole populations of people by just doing this one thing in this one area, and level up people's lives. It's another policy proposal in which I have, which is called the Welfaring City of Cities. It's creating an intentional framework in all of our cities to help to build up, projects and scaffoldings to improve our quality of lives, help us to be able to attain a status of self-reliance but interdependence, in which we all work together to, secure welfaring stewardship, and then be able to find best practices and then model that and replicate that framework in every city across the nation, so we know that there's a baseline fundamental standard, criterion standard, capacity by which all people can, benefit from that resource commons and level up their lives from it so that we can all achieve the good life. We could do that if, imagine all the resources that are being wasted and expended on foreign interests, foreign wars, and then trying to get out foreigners from America, instead was turned into the domestic interest of the best interest of everybody here. And then also respect and realize, man, we're going to need all hands on deck. We're going to need as many people as possible that are willing to positively contribute and participate to the leveling up of our lives in this way. So we need immigrants, and we need to have an immigration, capacity to make sure that bad actors with nefarious intent aren't roaming the streets going wild. But when you look at the situation of the immigration enforcement right now, that's not what's happening. Instead, we have ICE agents roaming the streets right now, shooting American citizens in the face. And I hold that moment of silence for Renee Good, who tragically had her life taken away from her. In a moment of chaos and controversy and cruelty. And here she was, just doing the right thing. What she felt in her heart was the right thing to do at that moment. She wanted to protect her community. She wanted to keep people safe from these bad actors with nefarious intent who were hard pressing to infiltrate their communities and disturb the peace, to forcefully remove people who were loved and cared for and cared about in that community that belonged there. And because she was doing the right thing, she was met by somebody who made the wrong choice in a heated moment. And now there has to be so much work to be done to set this right, to make Renee's family made whole and to honor her memory, and to make this ICE agent who pulled the trigger and shot that woman in the face, shot Renee in the face, that man now has to be made whole. And yes, I'm having compassion for him too, because he's human too, and he made a mistake, and he knows it, and he knows it. And it doesn't matter whether or not the president is going to try to give him immunity so he can't be held responsible. That man is now going to have to live the rest of his life knowing what he did. And he's going to have to look himself in the mirror every single day. And I feel it's important for the healing of our nation and for the, reestablishment of our integrities is to find a way to help to make him whole too. As a former caregiver for combat veterans, and knowing the detriment of PTSD and what that does to a human mind and to a human heart and to a human soul, it is an exceedingly challenging way to live out your life. And different people find different ways to cope with that stress, but it never goes away. And for all the people that were there witnessing what happened, they have PTSD too now. And every person who saw the reports of what happened and watched the videos online, including myself, we all have PTSD now. And instead of coming out with ways to help us to collectively, uniformly, in a united way, establish stress coping mechanisms to deal with this, to keep the temperature down and to prevent flare-ups of more violence in the aftermath of this, POTUS 47 instead is denying reality, rejecting the truth, denying justice, refusing to acknowledge what happened. Refusing to take ownership or accountability, because ultimately the buck stops with him. POTUS 47 is the one in charge and is the one that should take extreme ownership of this. And yet again, he fails the American people, and so does his vice president, and so does every person in the head of the administration's cabinet. None of them are taking responsibility. And so many people from the MAGA movement are trying to, justify this, and they're doing it with this outrage of this is just what happens, and trying to normalize it and accept it. So their coping mechanism with the PTSD that they now have is denial. And it's going to take them a long time to get to the healing phase of the grieving process if they're just going to spin their wheels in denial. And Trump is denying every American the capacity to move through the grieving process into healing by forcing everybody to accept an alternate version of reality, to live in denial. He's forcing everybody to spin their wheels in that. And so he's denying us to be healed and to be made whole. And it hurts my heart. As I've learned over the span of the hours in the aftermath of this tragic event of Renee's death, I have really taken to heart so much love for her and what she stood up for and what she represented in her act of courage and bravery and good humanity. And I think of her children. I think of her mother. I think of her father. I think of her friends, and I think of her neighbors, and I think of her wife and partner, and I think of everybody who was there witnessing what was happening. I think of America and the dark turn that we've just taken. And I think of all the failed leadership. And I also think of all of the stellar examples of good leadership, trying to lead youth in the future in a good direction. And I just try to draw strength from the silver lining of this situation to say that this woman will not have died in vain, that we will grow stronger from this experience, and we will honor her living memory. We will never forget her sacrifice. That ultimately is giving us a chance to be free, to take back the power, to liberate ourselves from the chaos and the mayhem of President Pandemonium and his MAGA cohort and his MAGA government regime. And we're going to do so with integrity. We're going to do so by not forcefully overthrowing the government, but just surpassing them. We will build a better way. We will make a better way. We will find a better way. And we will do it with determination that we will never lower ourselves to their standards. That we will forever invite them into a welcoming situation that we can all thrive on, and give them an opportunity to be made whole and brought back into the collective belonging in which we are living in peace with one another in a more perfect union. But we will never yield in our determination that we deserve better than this. And in that, I just continue to ask that you grant patience and compassion and empathy and humanity to all parties involved. None of us are enemies. There is a tremendous misunderstanding between us right now that we must consciously work to resolve and to find a path moving forward that leads us out of the darkness of this ignorance into a state of understanding with one another. And to continue to focus your time, your effort, your energy, your resources, your attention, your awareness, your kindness, your compassion, your sensibilities, your emotions, bring it all to the culmination of your efforts to help to work together towards engineering outcomes for a better future together. That's what I want for. And I'm building for, but I can't do this alone. But we can do it together. We will overcome the present circumstances. And from this, we will make a better world together. And I know we have the capacity to do that. Find it in your hearts, even if it is a small, glimmering hope within you that says that from this good things can come. If anything, Renee Good's life should prove to us that good things are going to come. In honor of her living memory, in honor of the sacrifice of every other American that has made over 250 years in the culmination of the formation of our nation. We owe it to ourselves and to each other, and to our children and our children's children, on and on and on throughout the generations to make sure that we do not allow ourselves to be lost in a moment of chaos, and instead turn towards each other with love and peace in our hearts, an intent on sewing those ties that bind us to help to keep us together in a more perfect union. I continue to pray to bless our path moving forward. And I continue to ask for your trust that together that we can make a better way. And I believe over time that we will prove to ourselves that this moment may make us, but it's not going to be for the sake of making us worse people. It's going to make us better people. We're going to make sure that despite the efforts of the current administration, President Pandemonium, POTUS 47 and his regime, and their attempts to make great, in which great means bad things happen to good people. We're going to resolve to instead, we are going to make sure that America does good. Because I would rather do good than make great, especially if making great means that people are left beside the road with bullet wounds to their face and no accountability is coming, at least from this administration. There's nothing great about that. And with that, I continue to pray and send out love to everybody and hope that we can all find a way to move through the grieving process in a way that is as frictionless as possible. And that from this we can grow and become stronger and more united as a people. And then we can better understand what we stand for and better understand what we will not stand for. And empower ourselves in this moment to take back our power and take away the power and authority that these bad actors with nefarious intent are trying to say that they have, which they don't. POTUS 47 and his regime do not have the power that they are claiming. They do not have that power. And until we, the people, determine our own powers and to take that back, we continue to be put in a precarious situation where how do we respond to the abuse of power by one of the branches of government? Again, all the more reason why we need to build in the leverage by which the people are themselves empowered to create a check and balance in our government system. We need a fourth branch to create a balance of checks of powers, to make sure that the people have a means to hold their government accountable to the people. And a civics branch of government does exactly that. And I ask you to consider it with all seriousness, the implications of having such a capacity. Imagine having that power right now to be able to serve as a corrective mechanism to say, while the government may want to reject reality and POTUS 47 may want to try to, protect everybody with a blanket generalized immunity and pardon capacity in the aftermath, that no, we the people say there has to be some sense of corrective mechanism, because we can't let this sort of lawlessness continue. It erodes our integrity, it undermines our democracy, it nullifies our Constitution, and we are nothing without that. So, reimagining and rebuilding our government with another branch to keep a check on power and to make sure that we are retaining our democracy and that we are always re-establishing our more perfect union, that when errors and mistakes happen, we fix them. We don't, deny them or reject them or forget them. We consciously live through the process of making amends. And the best way to do that is to make another constitutional amendment that gives us a fourth branch of government in the form of civics and establishes personal dominion. Doing so by evolving the Equal Rights Amendment and codifying it and ratifying it in every state throughout the nation and enacting it into law. And again, if we cannot accomplish that before the next election, that if you elect me as president, I will administer the government under the terms and conditions of what a 4-branch government system would look like, what it would involve, how it would play out in practice, and what the protocols would be in order to ensure that it fulfills that which helps us to form a more perfect union. And in that time period, we will work to perfect it and to make the model coherent so we know our rights and responsibilities, the duties of citizens, so that we can take ownership of it and we can empower ourselves to do the right thing for it, so that we can do everything necessary to solidify its legitimacy, to win over the hearts and the minds of every American so that we can establish it as a constitutional amendment. And I think in the meantime, if we work towards getting that accomplished, it's something that we can take our power back to do. This is something you can do that is more than just going out and holding up signs and protest and disgust and asking that the government be accountable to the people and to imploring the government just do the right thing. It takes it a step further and it says, I'm going to do that in a way that says that. It gives the big middle finger to the POTUS 47 regime, but in a way that respects the law and order in the ways in which they obviously can't do it. And it says, we believe so much in justice, what is just, what is fair, what is reasonable, and what is right, that we are going to enact through law and legislation the capacity to have a corrective mechanism because you've gone too far. And we're not going to let you get away with this any longer. We're going to create this corrective mechanism that makes sure that we are aligning and attuning with the things which were our guiding principles of the founding of our democratic republic. And all of our powers can go towards creating that. Organize with one another, keep up the constant conversation with one another, talk about how would this actually be worded, how would it be implemented, what will it look like. Keep up that constant conversation, speak to your legislators, vote in people who will help to support and push this through so that we can get a vote through every single state so that you can get it ratified. And then to press all elected and appointed officials to get on board with this, because this train's a running and we know where we're going. Get on board. I got a ticket for you. All people are welcome. This is a welcoming situation all people can thrive on. Nobody gets left behind, remember? But the more you drag your feet and you struggle and you try to prevent this from happening, the worse the situation is going to get for you, when the voters come to decide whether or not you're on our side come the elections. And then it gives us something to work towards, something to stand for, not just always having to stand against. There's a lot of work that has to be done to make this happen. It's not easy. It's not immediate. It's playing the long game. It's committing ourselves to doing what's right. Committing ourselves to do better and be better, to be a shining role model example of what is good to humanity, and to embody that in our life, our way of living, and to instill in us a sense of that even before this becomes an amendment, we got to live by it, And so we got to start doing the things now that make this a reality and make it possible. And in the development of, projects and organizations and institutions and our collective, identities that we are sharing with one another, our sensibilities of what is right, what is wrong, the conditioning of our behaviors and our characters, our sensibilities about things, the constant conversation that we have, the debates that we have, and the stances that we take, all these things have to reflect a sense that we are creating a more perfect union from establishing a more direct democracy by enacting a constitutional amendment that establishes a fourth branch of government in the form of civics and establishes our personal dominion, that creates an insulary protection of the individual person from the infringement or imposing of the government's will upon the people. We have to live that out loud. We have to be the living answer to it, and we have to work towards it and build up for it every single day. And we got to do it in the small ways within our own personal lives. We have to do it within our homes. We have to do it within our neighborhoods and our communities, among our families and our friends, our neighbors. And we have to do it in a sense of sharing that ideology, that vision for what America can become, not just with Americans, but the world, to say America wants to be this. Support America in our desire to become more and better and to do what is right, and have other nations champion for our success just as much as we champion for our own success. And then every act of good humanity that works towards the establishment of this being our new truth and reality that we live by, and it's the best truth that we know, that we every single day nullify and make obsolete the antiquated senses of the MAGA movement and the POTUS 47 regime that does not have your best interest at heart and does not have America's best interest at heart and does not have the world's best interest at heart. We instill a sense in each and every heart, in each and every mind in America and across the world that this is who we are. And we will never allow ourselves to be lowered to such an inhumane, indignified, depressing state of inhumanity as is being demanded and expected and set up for us by the POTUS 47 regime and the MAGA movement. I'm grateful, very, very grateful, as I'm always grateful for your very, very valuable, very, very precious time, attention, and consideration. And I hope in all the things that I've said that you have somehow sensed my determination and my insistence that this is the right thing to do. And I hope that you continuously hear in every iteration of my works that I put forth the constant consistency, the determination that this is the way. And not because I'm telling you, but because I'm showing you there is a better way. And you, through your conscious consideration and your own personal sensibilities, sense this is what is right. And you establish with me a constantly reaffirmed premise, purpose, vision, and strategy for America. That's predicated off of the principles of welfare and stewardship as being just this identity that we should all want for ourselves. And build a consensus around that. And to begin applying ourselves with all of our talents, our skills, our capabilities to make it a reality. And the more that you devote your time, effort, energy, conscious consideration to this, the more likely it is that it will happen. So focus your attention and your appreciation and your conscious awareness towards these sorts of things, and it will become ever more likely that that is the reality of which we will be living in. And in time, all the craziness and the chaos and the controversy and the pandemonium that we're experiencing right now will be such a far and distant memory that we will continuously be conscious of. But not because it's our lived experience, because we know what was so much more important that we did to make sure that that was no longer the reality that we were living. That was no longer the truth. Because we turned to the light, we turned to the way, and we made it for ourselves, and we said, this is what we want. And we will never be that which they try to make us out to be, which is lesser than the dignities and the prestige to which our nation founded for us with hope and want and promise and resolve and constitution. I appreciate you. Until next time, be well.